HOA poisoned a farmer's dog, they regretted it when he sued them for millions. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Guilty on all counts, the judge said, and Karen's face went white as chalk. 6 months earlier, none of this seemed possible. Back then, she was untouchable. I was just Brett, the farmer everyone underestimated. My name is Brett Calloway. I raise dairy goats on 5 acres my grandfather cleared by hand in 1961. My dog, Duke, was a rescue mutt with one floppy ear. He slept at the foot of my porch every night. I moved into Meadowbrook Estates 2 years ago, drawn by the low dues and the promise of quiet country living. I didn't know the HOA board was run like a tiny, vicious kingdom and its queen was named Karen Whitfield. Karen had chaired the board for 11 years. Nobody ran against her. Nobody dared. She wore pastel blazers and carried a clipboard everywhere, like a general inspecting troops before battle. Her rules were selectively enforced, strict for newcomers, invisible for her golf buddies on the board. At first, it was small things. A fine for my mailbox post being the wrong shade of white. Then a warning letter about my goat pen, which sat well within the property lines, but not within Karen's taste. Livestock is not permitted in a residential aesthetic community, she wrote, though goats had grazed there for 60 years. I laughed it off. Surely reasonable people ran things behind her. I hadn't yet met the rest of the board. The board, it turned out, was 3 retirees terrified of Karen and one man secretly recording everything for his own reasons. His name was Walter. He'd lose his temper at meetings and mutter, "Someone ought to document all this." 016 equals, I did not know yet how right he would turn out to be. I paid the mailbox fine. I paid the goat fine. I thought peace was cheaper than pride. Karen took my silence as weakness. She started walking her poodle past my fence every single morning, staring. "Cute dog," she said once, nodding at Duke. Something about her smile made the hair on my neck rise. 2 weeks later, a new HOA memo arrived: unleashed animals will be dealt with according to community safety protocol. Duke was never unleashed. He stayed on my land. But protocol, apparently, meant whatever Karen decided that day. I started keeping a folder. Every letter, every fine, every date. My neighbor Sophia told me, "Document everything, Brett. Trust me." Sophia had fought Karen before, over a wheelchair ramp denial. She lost, but she never forgot the paper trail Karen destroyed. She shreds inconvenient records, Sophia warned. But email doesn't shred itself. Get it in writing. I began emailing the board after every phone call, confirming our conversation, a habit that would matter more than I knew. Karen hated email. She preferred hallway threats and vague verbal warnings that left no fingerprints. One Tuesday, I found a strange scattering of blue-green pellets near Duke's water bowl by the fence line. I didn't think much of it. Raccoon bait, maybe. I swept it up and tossed it in the trash. That night, Duke wouldn't stop panting. By morning, he was vomiting and could barely stand. I rushed him to the emergency vet clinic 40 minutes away, my hands shaking on the wheel the entire drive. Rodenticide poisoning, the vet said grimly. Bromethylene, by the look of his symptoms. Someone placed this deliberately. My stomach dropped. Deliberately. Someone had put poison bait exactly where my dog would find it. The vet bill alone was $4,000. Duke needed 2 nights of intensive care to survive. I drove home in a fury I didn't recognize in myself, calm on the outside, boiling underneath. I checked my trail camera, the one I'd installed after noticing tools going missing from my shed last spring. The footage showed a figure in a lavender jacket, at 5:47 a.m., crouching by my fence with a small bag. I zoomed in. The face was blurry, but the clipboard tucked under one arm was unmistakable. My blood ran cold. Karen Whitfield had poisoned my dog over a leash violation that never even happened. I didn't confront her yet. Sophia's voice echoed in my head, "Document everything. Never tip your hand early." I saved the footage in triplicate, my laptop, a cloud drive and a USB buried in a fireproof box. I filed a police report the next morning, citing animal cruelty and criminal trespass, footage attached. The detective watched the video twice, frowning. That's a strong lead. We'll need to confirm identity before charges. Karen, meanwhile, sent the HOA newsletter that same week, praising our vigilant community watch against wandering animals. The audacity of it made my jaw clench. She was rewriting the story before I even opened my mouth. I decided to play it patient. Publicly polite, privately relentless. Karen had no idea what was coming. I hired a lawyer, Priya Anand, who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for dismantling corrupt boards. This isn't just a civil matter, Priya said, reviewing the footage. This could be animal cruelty, a criminal charge. She also flagged something I'd missed. Karen's poison purchase might be traceable through hardware store loyalty records. Sophia mentioned she'd seen Karen buying gopher poison at Miller's Hardware, joking she was at war with wildlife. Miller's Hardware kept receipts tied to rewards accounts. Priya subpoenaed the record before Karen could think to hide it. The receipt showed a purchase of bromethylene pellets, dated the evening before Duke got sick, timestamped 6:12 p.m. It was the first real crack in Karen's armor, though she didn't know yet that we'd found it. At the next HOA meeting, Karen announced a pet safety task force, volunteering herself as its chairwoman. I sat in the back row, silent, watching her perform concern for the very dog she'd tried to kill. Walter caught my eye across the room and gave the smallest nod. He'd been recording that meeting too. After the meeting, Karen approached me with saccharine sympathy. I heard about your dog. Just terrible, isn't it? Terrible, I agreed, holding her gaze. Especially since whoever did it left quite the trail. Her smile flickered for half a second before locking back into place. She hadn't expected that. I hope the culprit is found, she said, turning on her heel. Her pace out the door was suspiciously fast. That night, Priya called. The vet report, the footage and the receipt together, this is enough to open a case. Part 2 begins with the case quietly building while Karen's public campaign against me grows louder and stranger. Karen filed a formal HOA complaint accusing me of harassment, claiming I'd been photographing her without consent. It was a preemptive strike, Priya explained. She's trying to make herself the victim before the truth comes out. The board scheduled a hearing. Karen intended to have me fined, or worse, forced to remove Duke from the property. I brought Priya. Karen hadn't expected a lawyer in the room and her composure cracked visibly. This is a homeowners meeting, not a courtroom, Karen snapped, but her voice wavered on the last word. Priya calmly laid out the timeline, the poisoning, the vet report, the hardware receipt, the trail camera footage. The 3 retiree board members went pale. Walter, to my surprise, spoke up. I have recordings too. Karen's mask slipped entirely. This is a setup, she hissed. I don't know what nonsense you're peddling. The receipt has your name and rewards number, Priya said flatly. Would you like to explain the timestamp? Karen stormed out, declaring the meeting adjourned, though she had no authority to end it unilaterally. The retirees looked at each other, terrified, then at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Walter stayed behind. She's done this before, he admitted. A cat 2 years ago. Family moved away rather than fight. That revelation changed everything. This wasn't an isolated cruelty. It was a pattern, hidden by fear and silence. Priya filed a public records request for prior animal control complaints tied to Meadowbrook Estates addresses. 3 more poisoning reports surfaced, all unsolved, all near homes of residents who'd recently clashed with Karen. One was the Petrov family's cat. One was a neighbor's chickens. One, chillingly, was a service dog. I felt sick. Karen wasn't just petty. She was systematically punishing anyone who challenged her authority. The detective reopened those old cases, cross-referencing Karen's hardware purchases against each incident's timeline. Every single poisoning lined up with a Miller's Hardware receipt under Karen's rewards account, days before each incident. It was almost too perfect, too careless, as if she believed no one would ever look that closely. Meanwhile, Karen tried a new tactic, recruiting sympathy. She posted in the neighborhood group about targeted harassment against elderly women. Several longtime residents rallied behind her, not knowing the truth, only knowing Karen as their tireless volunteer. It stung, watching people I waved to every morning defend the woman who'd nearly killed my dog. Sophia reminded me, the truth doesn't need applause right now. It just needs to survive long enough to be heard. Duke, thankfully, was recovering, though the vet warned his kidneys might carry lasting damage from the poisoning. Every time he limped to his water bowl, my resolve hardened instead of softened. Karen escalated again, filing a lien threat against my property over unpaid landscaping violation fines from months ago. Priya called it retaliation, plain and documented, and added it to our growing civil complaint. She's panicking, Priya said. People who panic make mistakes. Let her keep making them. True to form, Karen scheduled an emergency board vote to have me formally expelled from HOA membership rights. It was a desperate, almost comedic overreach. HOAs cannot expel residents from owning their own homes. Priya sent a cease and desist letter reminding the board that such a vote would itself be actionable. Karen ignored it, holding the vote anyway, losing 3-1 when even her allies balked at the illegality. Her grip on the board was slipping, plank by plank, and she could feel it. That's when the twist landed. Walter revealed he'd been quietly collecting proxy votes to call a recall election. I should have done this years ago, he admitted. I was scared of her. I'm done being scared. The recall petition needed 30% of homeowner signatures. Within 4 days, we had nearly double that. Karen's public campaign collapsed overnight once residents learned about the pattern of poisonings across the neighborhood. People who once defended her now avoided eye contact at the mailbox, ashamed of their misplaced loyalty. The temporary lull felt eerie. Karen went quiet, no memos, no fines, no morning poodle walks past my fence. Sophia warned me not to relax. Cornered animals don't surrender. They bite harder. Then came the twist buried in old paperwork. Karen wasn't even legally the HOA president anymore, her term had lapsed. A bylaw clause required re-election every 3 years. Karen had simply never held one and no one had checked. That meant every fine, every fee, every emergency vote for the last 2 years was potentially void. Priya filed a motion arguing the entire board's authority during that period was legally invalid. Karen's lawyer, hastily hired, argued custom and practice validated her tenure. The judge was unimpressed. The criminal case against her for animal cruelty moved to formal charges, 3 counts, 1 per confirmed poisoning. Karen's mugshot leaked online within hours, pastel blazer replaced by an orange jumpsuit and a furious scowl. The neighborhood group that once defended her exploded with outrage, this time pointed squarely at Karen. I felt something close to relief, but not victory yet. Karen still had money and money buys delay. Her lawyer requested a continuance, claiming she needed time to prepare a defense against circumstantial evidence. Priya scoffed at the word circumstantial. A time-stamped receipt and video footage aren't circumstantial. They're a confession. The judge granted a short continuance, but set strict conditions. Karen could not contact any complaining witnesses. Naturally, Karen violated that order within a week, leaving a voicemail for Sophia calling her a liar. Priya submitted the voicemail to the court. The judge's patience visibly thinned during the next hearing. Ms. Whitfield, do you understand the meaning of a no-contact order? The judge asked, unimpressed by her excuses. Karen tried to charm the courtroom the way she charmed the HOA meetings. It did not work here. Part 2 closes with Karen's recall vote scheduled for the same week as her preliminary criminal hearing. 2 storms, converging on one woman who thought her clipboard made her untouchable. Part 3 opens with the recall election morning, homeowners lining up early, folders of fines in their hands. Karen arrived in her pastel blazer, chin high, as if daring anyone to look her in the eye. The vote wasn't close. 89% in favor of removal. Karen's decade-long reign ended in a single afternoon. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply said, "You'll all regret this," and walked to her car. That line would come back to haunt her, recorded by 3 different phones held up in the crowd. Walter was voted interim president. His first act was releasing all HOA financial records for public review. What we found next was the twist that turned outrage into something closer to disbelief. 128 equals, Karen had been quietly billing the HOA for consulting fees paid to a company she secretly owned. Over 4 years, nearly $90,000 in resident dues had flowed into her own pocket. It wasn't just cruelty anymore. It was theft, dressed up in landscaping invoices and vendor contracts. The district attorney added embezzlement charges to the growing pile against her. Karen's husband, previously silent, filed for divorce that same week, citing irreconcilable differences in a 2-line statement. Neighbors whispered he'd known nothing about the poisonings and had simply had enough of her control over everything. Priya used the discovery process to depose Karen directly, a moment I'd waited months to witness. Under oath, Karen claimed the poison was for rodents, insisting the timing near Duke's poisoning was coincidence. Priya produced the trail camera footage, time-stamped and clear, Karen crouching at my fence line, not near any rodent burrow. Karen's own lawyer visibly winced. Coincidence doesn't wear a lavender jacket at 5:47 in the morning. I was checking your fence for HOA violations, Karen tried, grasping for anything that sounded plausible. At dawn? With poison pellets? Priya asked. Karen had no answer that didn't sound like an admission. The deposition transcript became public record. Local news picked up the story, HOA Queen's reign of poison and profit. Reporters camped outside her house. The same clipboard that once intimidated neighbors now dangled useless at her side. A short lull followed while both sides prepared for trial, but it wasn't peace, it was reloading. During that lull, I finally let myself grieve what almost happened, replaying Duke's shaking body in that vet clinic. Sophia sat with me one evening and said quietly, "You didn't do this to her. She did this to herself." I realized then that this fight was never really about a fence line or a leash law. It was about whether ordinary people had to accept cruelty just because someone held a clipboard and a title. Karen's defense tried a new angle, blaming Walter, suggesting he'd planted evidence out of a personal grudge. It fell apart instantly. Walter's recordings predated the poisoning by months, proving no motive to fabricate anything. Then came another twist. The hardware store manager came forward voluntarily, remembering Karen's exact words at checkout. She joked, "This should take care of that mutt problem for good," the manager testified, visibly uncomfortable. The courtroom went silent. Even Karen's own lawyer looked down at his notes, unwilling to meet her eyes. Karen's face, for the first time in the entire ordeal, showed something other than practiced composure, fear. The prosecution added a 4th charge, premeditation, based on the manager's testimony and the time-stamped receipt together. Priya's civil case ran parallel, seeking damages for vet bills, emotional distress and the years of harassment before it. She calculated total damages, including punitive multipliers for premeditated animal cruelty, north of $2 million. Karen's lawyer tried to negotiate a quiet settlement, hoping to avoid a public trial altogether. Priya refused. "My client doesn't want quiet. He wants the truth on record, for every other Karen watching." That line made it into local news too, and strangers began messaging me their own HOA horror stories. Dozens of them. Other Brett Callaways, other Dukes, other clipboards wielded like weapons in quiet suburban wars. Part 3 ends with jury selection for the criminal trial and Karen's public support reduced to exactly 0. Part 4 opens on trial morning, the courthouse steps crowded with reporters and former Meadowbrook neighbors. I testified first, describing Duke's symptoms, the emergency vet visit and the terror of not knowing if he'd survive. The prosecutor played the trail camera footage for the jury, frame by frame, lavender jacket unmistakable. Karen's lawyer objected to prejudicial editing, but the judge ruled the raw footage spoke for itself. The vet testified next, confirming bromethylene poisoning matched exactly the pellets found at Miller's Hardware. The hardware manager repeated his testimony about Karen's chilling joke at the register, word for word, unwavering. Walter testified about the pattern of poisonings tied to residents who challenged Karen's authority over the years. One by one, the Petrov family and 2 other victims described losing their pets under eerily similar circumstances. The courtroom's mood shifted from disbelief to quiet fury as each new victim spoke. Karen's lawyer tried one last twist, arguing entrapment, claiming I'd baited her by installing the camera deliberately. The judge dismissed it instantly. Installing a camera on your own property is not entrapment, counselor. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Karen took the stand herself, against her lawyer's visible objection. She tried charm first, addressing the jury like a garden club audience, calling herself a protector of standards. The prosecutor asked one simple question: did you purchase bromethylene the day before Duke's poisoning, yes or no? Karen hesitated, then admitted it, but insisted it was for rats, refusing to acknowledge the timing. And the comment at the register about the mutt problem? The prosecutor asked. Karen's composure finally shattered. I don't recall saying that, she snapped, though 4 witnesses in the room clearly did. Her voice cracked on cross-examination when confronted with the embezzlement records tied to her fake consulting company. That was compensation for my time, she insisted, though no contract or board vote ever authorized it. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours, a suspiciously short time for such a complex case. When they filed back in, I gripped Sophia's hand so tightly she later showed me the marks. Guilty. Animal cruelty, guilty. Criminal trespass, guilty. Premeditation enhancement, guilty. Embezzlement, guilty on all 4 counts. That was the moment from the very beginning, the gavel cracking like a gunshot, Karen's face going white. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, but the civil case moved swiftly in the aftermath. Priya's firm negotiated a settlement rather than risk a runaway jury verdict against Karen's remaining assets. $1.8 million, covering vet bills, emotional damages, punitive multipliers and legal fees combined. Karen would have to sell her house, the same house where she once ruled Meadowbrook like a fiefdom. At sentencing, the judge cited her total lack of remorse as grounds for the maximum available term. 18 months for animal cruelty, running consecutively with restitution for embezzlement, plus a lifetime HOA board ban. Karen was led out in handcuffs, no clipboard, no pastel blazer, no crowd of frightened retirees to obey her. Walter told me afterward that the board had already voted, unanimously, to rename the Pet Safety Task Force after Duke. Small justice, but it made me laugh for the first time in months, imagining Karen hearing that detail in her cell. Sophia hosted a small gathering at her house, the same neighbors who'd once looked away now toasting to accountability. Duke, tail wagging despite his lingering limp, was declared guest of honor, draped in a ridiculous paper crown. The Petrov family came too, hugging me tightly, thanking me for pulling a thread none of us knew existed. You didn't just win your case, Petrov said. You gave the rest of us permission to fight back. I thought about all the residents who'd moved away silently rather than challenge Karen, never getting this ending. Part 4's cliffhanger arrived quietly. Karen's original board records revealed a 5th undocumented poisoning, from years before I moved in. A family long since relocated, their beloved beagle poisoned after a dispute over a garden gnome, of all things. Priya tracked them down. They hadn't even known their old HOA president was now behind bars. They flew back for the restitution hearing, closure they never expected to receive after all these years. The judge added their case to the record, extending Karen's restitution obligations even further into her ruined finances. Karen's consulting company, it turned out, had also billed a neighboring HOA she'd secretly advised under a fake name. That HOA opened its own investigation, meaning Karen's legal troubles would likely outlast her prison sentence entirely. I finally exhaled the breath I felt like I'd been holding since that first blue-green pellet by the water bowl. Duke's kidney damage, thankfully, stabilized with medication, though the vet said we'd monitor him for the rest of his life. I built a proper enclosed pen for him anyway, no longer trusting any fence line near shared HOA property. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's obsession with rules had ended with her breaking nearly every one that mattered. Meadowbrook Estates elected new bylaws limiting board terms, mandating financial audits and banning unilateral fine authority entirely. Walter, humble as ever, declined to run for permanent president, insisting new blood should lead going forward. Sophia ran instead and won easily, promising transparency after years of watching Karen operate in shadows. The community that once whispered behind my back now waved genuinely, embarrassed by how long they'd stayed silent. I don't blame them entirely. Fear like Karen's is engineered slowly, fine by fine, until silence feels safer than truth. Still, some things can't be undone. Duke will carry that damage forever, a quiet reminder written into his body. I keep the vet's first diagnosis printed and framed, not out of anger, but to remember what silence costs. Priya told me my case had already been cited in 2 other HOA lawsuits across neighboring counties. You didn't just get justice, she said. You built a blueprint for anyone else facing the same nightmare. Karen, from prison, apparently still writes letters to the new board, quoting old bylaws no one enforces anymore. Walter reads them aloud at meetings sometimes and the room laughs, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. The woman who once terrified an entire neighborhood over mailbox paint now argues rules from a cell, unheard. I visited the courthouse steps one last time, the same steps where reporters had once crowded around my testimony. Duke sat beside me in the parking lot, sunlight on his fur, tail thumping against the truck bed. I thought about how close I came to simply paying every fine and staying silent to avoid conflict. If I had, Karen would still be sitting on that board, clipboard in hand, poisoned somewhere in her garage. Instead, 5 pets were finally accounted for, 1 embezzlement scheme exposed and 1 tyrant removed for good. The cost was real too. Legal fees, sleepless nights, a dog who nearly died over a leash law that never applied. But watching Karen's face when the verdict landed, I finally understood what people meant by satisfying justice. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about making sure no other Duke suffered for someone else's ego. Sophia asked me once if I'd do it all again, knowing the cost. I didn't hesitate before answering yes. Silence protects the Karens of the world, I told her. Documentation protects everyone else. The neighborhood group, once a place of quiet fear, now shares reminders, keep records, report everything, trust your instincts. Duke's paper crown from the party still sits on my mantle, a strange trophy for an even stranger war. I planted a small oak near his pen, a marker for the days he nearly didn't make it. Karen's house sold within weeks, bought by a young family with 2 kids and, fittingly, a golden retriever. They asked me, half joking, if the HOA still enforced pet restrictions. I told them those days were over. The new bylaws hang framed in the clubhouse now, a quiet monument to what unchecked power almost cost us. I still find myself checking the trail camera out of habit, though nothing suspicious ever appears anymore. Some nights I think about the other families, the ones who moved away and never got their answers. Justice arrived late for them, but it arrived and Karen finally paid for every pellet she ever scattered. Duke sleeps soundly on the porch again, safe in that, more than any verdict, is the ending that matters most.